What's up, guys? Crit here. Today's going to be a fun one. Today we're going to be tier ranking various lower back rehab movements. Now, I want to throw out a quick disclaimer. A lot of these movements are used in a non-rehab sense and just used as general exercises. So just so everything is approached here with clarity, I want to mention that these are going to be examined under a lower back rehab lens. Some of you guys might attack me for throwing a movement in a lower tier that you think is more useful. This is my opinion. As a rehab coach, we've got 5 tiers here. We've got 15 exercises. I'm going to be judging them based off of scalability, meaning how far you can take them, adaptation, and dosage over time, and just also their general effectiveness, right? So let's just get right into it. Number 1, the collicual lower back rehab movement, the back extension. Y'all are going to hate me for this, but I am throwing it into B tier. Why? For one, it's a very scalable movement. You can start off with the isometric and then progress to full range reps, flexion and extending under load. You can start adding weight to it. The reason I'm putting it in B tier is because it is really overrated. And I think that there's kind of a backwards notion in the lower back rehab community where back extensions are just a one size fits all. And if you can do 50 of them, you'll just magically be out of pain for good. That is not the case. I could do 100 bodyweight back extensions at the peak of my pain, and I would still flare up trying to RDL above 65 pounds. They are not a magic bullet. They are a fantastic movement. I really do love the traction and decompression effect that you get when you do round your spine and flex under load and allow gravity to segment out your vertebrae. This is also great because when you flex on the way down and extend on the way up, you are practicing imbibition. Imbibition, remember this term, it'll be very important later on for a different exercise, is the pumping mechanism of the spine, right? The spinal discs act as a sponge. So when you compress the discs, you are quite literally expelling waste from them. And when you decompress them, you are allowing nutrients to be drawn in. So over time, this pumping mechanism, right, if you do it in a movement like a back extension, can be very, very, very helpful for rehabilitating spinal injuries and restoring discs back to their natural capacities. They are a great movement. The only reason they are in B tier is, as I mentioned, there is a weird notion going on that they are all you need to fix your back pain, and that is not the case. Phenomenal movement for rehab, but you need a bit more than that. That's why it's going in B tier. Now, just to get this one out of the way too, this is what I call PT slop, this picture right here. Right here is a girl doing a trunk rotation. They love giving these out in PT. The other things I would throw in this category are movements like bird dogs, planks, banded clamshells. They are all junk, and that's why they're going in D tier. There is nothing wrong with these movements inherently. If I have a guy coming to me who literally just is freshly off a disc bulge, I will program him bird dogs. I will program him those rudimentary core exercises. The issue with PT slop work, as I call it, is that they will give you these really, really foundational movements that are really only good for alleviating symptoms for the most part, and then keep giving them to you months on end. You'll go to an insurance-based PT, they will give you trunk rotations, they will give you bird dogs, they'll program you with banded clamshells, and 4 months later, you'll be doing the same movements without any progression at all, which leads to a net zero when it comes to actual adaptation in your lower back muscles. Remember, the name of the game here is building tissue tolerance in your lower back. PTs like to think that doing core movements endlessly and doing these symptom alleviating stretches will get you there. It absolutely won't. That's why a lot of people who have tried PT and it failed them come to me, which is 95% of the people I talk to, because the PT slop, as I note right here, in D is just not it. Very similar to this one is decompression. This one has a bit more nuance to it, which is why I'm throwing it in C tier, but still belongs in C tier. Why? Well, for one, just to list the benefits, if you were paying attention 2 minutes ago, right? Imbibition. When you actively decompress your spine, you are allowing nutrients to pour in. This does a good job of healing the disc. However, just doing decompression work is not going to have a great return on investment because it's usually more of a symptom reliever than it is a movement to actually rebuild long-term capacity and tolerance. If you have back problems and you had like a 15-hour flight the day before, or even like an 8-hour long road trip, and you've been sitting for 8 hours and your spine has been compressed and probably even flexed because of your posture, right? Because usually when people sit, the spine is compressed and then they'll be hunched over, and that also leads to flexion that can aggravate the hell out of a disc injury or just even general lower back pain. That is when decompression right here has an awesome use because you're allowing your spine to decompress. But it's similar with the back extension. It's a phenomenal movement. People don't really use it in the way that they should because they will do decompression work for months on end every single day and wonder why they're not seeing any results. They're not building long-term tolerance over time. Great movement, not used correctly, which is why it belongs in C tier. All right, now we got a fun one. Deadlift, D tier. Just instant D tier. Why? In a strength sense, the deadlift is a phenomenal movement for building your posterior chain. It targets more muscles than practically any other exercise in existence. In a rehab sense, the only reason you would ever be doing a deadlift is to get back to deadlifting. That is at the end phase of your rehab. That's like month 4 or 5. When you've already built the tolerance using all of these other exercises and are now trying to actively build up your deadlift so that you can train it again pain-free. But when it comes to rehabbing your lower back, you're not gonna be able to do a deadlift until the later months of your rehab. And by that point, you already have the capacity to do pretty much every other movement, right? The deadlift is literally like the final boss of your spinal tissue tolerance because of the leverage it demands. Any single hinge movement, just by virtue of physics and gravity, when you are folding your torso over like this, you are going to have more stress placed on your spine. The deadlift also demands that you have the tolerance in your back to pick up heavy loads from the floor. You're not going to be able to do that until you're pretty much back. So in a rehab sense, the deadlift is pretty redundant. That's why it's in D tier. Now, when it comes to doing Zercher movements, so this picture is of a guy doing a Zercher squat, but I also want to include Zercher deadlifts and Zercher Jefferson curls just under this kind of umbrella that I will call Zerchers. It is going into B tier. And the reason for this is very similar to the deadlift. You are not going to be able to do these movements until you are in a much later stage of your rehab. But once you can actually do them, they're going to give you such a great bang for your buck for building that actual tissue tolerance and kind of capping off your rehab, right? The Zercher squat is such a good movement because when you hold the barbell in the crooks of your elbows like this, instead of having the barbell on your back, you don't have that axial compression. Axial compression is when your spine is actively being compressed. You can imagine if you have a barbell on your back trying to do a back squat, that is actively squeezing against your spine, right? When it comes to a Zercher squat, there is not as much axial compression. You're able to stay a lot more upright, and it still has a really, really great strengthening effect on your spinal erectors and your deeper lower back muscles, and also just your core in general. Holding a Zercher in this position is going to make your core fire like crazy, which is why when you're able to do it around month 3 to 4 of your rehab, if you've been progressing correctly, you're going to see a huge ROI from doing these movements. Same thing for Zercher deadlifts, right? You're not going to be able to actually pick up a barbell from the floor in a rounded back position until you've built a lot of tissue tolerance. Once you can do that pain-free though, starting around like 75 pounds off the floor, you're going to be building from there a lot, and you're going to see a lot of extra mileage added to your tissue tolerance. But the caveat is that you have to do all this work first before you can access those movements. That's why it's going in B tier. Stretching. Now, when it comes to stretching, and this is a big one that I want to clarify, I am not against stretching. You should be stretching on a regular basis. What I am against is stretching purely for symptom relief. If you go on YouTube and you watch these videos on how to pop your back and you feel good for maybe 30 minutes, that is such junk. That is a short-term dopamine hit. You feel good for 30 minutes. You got to wake up tomorrow morning and do it again to get that same effect. That is short-term relief at the highest level. You can do these every single day for months on end and feel the relief only when you do them, or you can actually invest your time and your energy in a long-term rehab plan that will get you out of pain and back to lifting or playing sports for the rest of your life. That's a choice. Because we're in 2026 and there are so many forms of instant gratification out there, some people would rather spend 20 minutes stretching every single day and only feeling the short-term hit and get scared at the idea of doing something long-term for 3 to 4 months. Those people are way too far gone. I pray for them, but also at the same time, you can only lead a horse to water. It is a shame. It's going in D tier for all of those reasons. Shouldn't need to explain further. Now, this one's going to be interesting, and people don't talk about this enough at all. Imbalance work / muscle activation / and this is a mouthful, undoing muscle inhibition. You're probably scratching your head wondering, what the hell is Christian talking about? Here's the reality of the situation, and this is why this is going in S tier. A huge fraction of my current clientele suffer from a muscle imbalance. I did as well. The most common instance of these muscle imbalances is a spinal erector imbalance. So your lower back muscles, the big snakes that run along the length of your spine and your lower back, what can happen is post-injury, your brain freaks out. Your nervous system thinks to itself, oh my God, we just herniated a disc. We just bulged a disc. And what it does is it reorganizes your body, doing what it thinks is a protective measure. So it'll shut off certain muscles. It'll turn the dial up on activation for other muscles, usually to compensate for those muscles that were shut off, right? Or at least inhibited, meaning that you can't access them as well neurologically. If you try to like flex your oblique, for instance, and it's shut off by your brain, you can't fire that muscle as hard. That's a nervous system response. What happens is that people will have shut off muscles, inhibited muscles that they need to activate, and they will literally go on for years not even knowing and try to rehab by doing something like, let's say, a back extension. When you're doing a back extension and you have one spinal erector that is shut off or inhibited, the other side is just compensating the entire time, and your nervous system will never allow your body to actually heal, to regain trust, because you're moving incorrectly. Which is why, in my case, I had a lot of really nasty imbalances. My pain loop was not shut off until I fixed those imbalances. In my case specifically, I had a really overworked left spinal erector. My right erector was shut off. Every single time I would do something that demanded both sides, my left erector would take over, and my nervous system interpreted that as a threat every single time. The way to get out of pain is to get your nervous system to start trusting your body and your movements. If you have a lot of weird muscle imbalances and you never address them, the scary part is that you could be spinning your wheels trying to rehab it for years. And until that imbalance gets cut off, the pain will keep cycling back because the structure was never addressed. That's why these are going in S tier, criminally underrated. And that's why every single person that I work with gets an assessment first, because half the time they do have these weird imbalances that need to be looked at. All right, above the knee rag pull. This is also a weird one. A lot of people don't really know about the usage of this movement. This is going in A tier for a very specific and a very niche reason. When it comes to rebuilding your hinge or rebuilding your deadlift, the above the knee rack pull is such a unique movement because it allows you to overload the weight without triggering a threat response from your nervous system, because the bar is literally only moving a couple inches. When I was rehabbing this, I could do over 400 pounds on the above the knee rack pull, and my back thought it was okay. It wouldn't flare my back up. I wouldn't get pain because the barbell is moving such a short amount. The nervous system is like, okay, this is safe. This is fine. Now, when it comes to the return on investment of the above the knee rack pull, you don't realize how much trust you're building in your nervous system by actively hinging 200 plus pounds. Even if the range of motion is literally like this, okay? It is so short, but when you mentally have that narrative of, oh my God, I can actually hinge 200 plus pounds now, even if it's only like 3 inches, that is such a huge feedback loop going in your nervous system, building trust. And not to mention, it's accessing the first quadrant of the hinge motion, right? So it's really huge in rebuilding the deadlift step by step. That's why it's going in A tier. Now keep in mind, the above the knee rack pull comes a lot later in the natural progression of hinging. And by that progression, I talk about this a lot. It's usually seated good morning, wall hip hinge, back extension, dumbbell RDL, above the knee rack pull, RDL, and then deadlift. And if you want to check that out more in depth, I have a return to deadlift video also on this page. But for all of those reasons, the above the knee rack pull, which does not get talked about enough, is going in the A tier. All right, seated good mornings. This may surprise people. It's also going in S tier. It is so freaking scalable. When people come to me and tell me, Christian, my back flares up trying to do a back extension iso hold, which is commonly perceived as like ground zero for back rehab, building tissue tolerance, it's not. The seated good morning iso hold can be done by virtually every single person with a case of back pain without pain. And that is always my recommended first step as somebody's baseline starting point, meaning the first movement that they should work on that doesn't flare them up, that they can actively develop, build tolerance with, and move on to more advanced lower back exercises. The seated good morning iso hold is genuine gold when it comes to that. For people who have really, really sensitive backs and need a more regressed starting point. And because it is so scalable, you can literally start with your hands in your head, side of a chair, literally only pitching forward a couple degrees, and your back muscles will still be firing. Over time, you can get a bit deeper, giving your torso more and more room to hinge, placing more and more leverage and stress on your lower back muscles, feeding them those adaptations over time as your torso is moving, eventually getting down here when you're mobile enough at like a 45-degree angle, right? And then once you're at that point and you've built the tolerance there, you could actually start doing dynamic hinging reps, even at just body weight, with the See You Good Morning. Once you can do like 20 of those pain-free, then you can add dumbbells, hold them in between your thighs, go down with them, feel the stretch on your adductors, feed even more dosages of adaptation to your lower back muscles. Eventually, you can add a freaking easy bar, just 25 pounds, progress with those. Then you can throw a barbell on, 45 pounds. And I still use these in my programming every single leg day. You can even just add a safety bar if you have it, right? You can start doing them with 65 pounds. Right now, I do them with like 135 pounds for 3 sets of 15. They're freaking mint. They're so good for hip mobility. They're really, really great for building the spinal erectors all the way up the length of the spine, building the upper back. And they're so freaking scalable, as I mentioned, which is why they belong in S tier. Now, and everybody knows I love this one, the wall hip hinge. This one is going in A tier for the same reason as the above the knee rack pull. It is really underrated and not used enough as a tool to rebuild your hinge. As I said, this is a great natural progression after you get the See You Good Morning. The wall hip hinge, and you can also scale this too. Really just putting your butt on a wall and hinging down until you feel your lower back muscles firing. Putting your hands on your head here helps as well to fire the lower back muscles even harder. And then also beginning to actively hinge, just doing like time under tension reps for like sets of 30 and 50. Just teaching your nervous system that the hinge is safe. It is so freaking mint. I was able to deadlift 415 pounds at 170 pounds pre-injury. I had to regress back to doing wall hip hinges. There was obviously a super huge blow to my ego doing hip hinges on a wall at body weight, but I needed to regress back to an exercise that was pain-free where I could feed information to my nervous system that, hey, listen, the hinge movement, which was like my freaking kryptonite, is actually safe to do. And that is also, as a quick tangent, the whole entire point of rehab, if you haven't noticed, is regressing back to your baseline starting point where you can do these movements pain-free, feeding your nervous system the info that, hey, this is safe, this is okay. We're actually building tolerance here. There's no need to catastrophize, no need to feel threatened, no need to flare us up tomorrow morning. And then you give your nervous system and you give your lower back muscles those subtle nudges forward over time, incrementally and very, very gradually building up tolerance by increasing reps, increasing volume, eventually increasing weight too, and just laying down those small deposits over time that let you get from doing something as rudimentary as a wall hip hinge all the way to doing something like a deadlift. Wall hip hinges are not used enough. If you're a client of mine, you will be doing them, which is why they're going in A tier. All right, pretty similar. It's a wall hip hinge, but with weight, and your butt is not on the wall. Dumbbell RDL. I'm gonna be putting these in B tier. They're a great movement for rebuilding tissue tolerance in the hinge. They're not really special besides that. If you struggle with doing a barbell RDL and that gives you pain, regressing back to something like a dumbbell RDL, just doing like 30 pounds to start and then building up incrementally, is a really great way to build tissue tolerance. It's a great way to progress back to the deadlift. Besides that, it's nothing really that special. It's just an exercise that I will program because it helps. There's no need for a deep breakdown analysis on the dumbbell RDL. It's not really necessary. It's a good movement for rebuilding tolerance. That's pretty much it. Same thing with the single leg RDL, except it is a bit better. So I'll put it like B.5. Yeah, I can do that. Screw it. B.5. We're running B.5 here. Single leg RDL is also great for building tolerance. And additionally, it's really great at fishing out imbalances. If you have a spinal erector discrepancy or imbalance, as I noted earlier, or if one glute isn't firing as hard as the other, one hamstring isn't firing as hard as the other. If you have any weird imbalance going on in your chain, the single leg RDL will expose it. And that's why when I run assessments with clients, I make them do a single leg RDL and I have them tell me how it felt and if they noticed anything strange going on, because it is a really great tool for fishing out imbalances, as I said, and also a really great tool for addressing those imbalances. Unilateral work is the way to go when it comes to addressing imbalances. The single leg RDL is a great way to do that. It's nothing really that special, but it is a very excellent tool, which is why it's going in B.5. All right, approaching the end here. We got 3 more left. I'm sure people are interested to hear what I think about the Jefferson curl. The Jefferson curl is going in A. It's a phenomenal movement. I think that some people are a bit too gung-ho with it in the rehab sphere. If a guy is coming to me and he has really bad flexion intolerance, meaning that he's unable to round his spine without excruciating pain, I'm obviously not going to program him a Jefferson curl off the rip. Some guys do that, which is stupid. However, on that same note, if you are flexion intolerant, the best way to get rid of that is to expose yourself to flexion. A lot of people might disagree. Too bad. That is simply how it goes. You're not going to get better at rounding your back by giving yourself endless core stability work. You have to fight fire with fire. And there are much better ways to regress a Jefferson curl. You can do things like child poses. You can do cat-cows. So these are very, very baseline. But if you're dealing with an extreme case of flexion intolerance, guess what? You need to regress back to those. If you are able to do Jefferson curls, they are amazing because you don't realize how much trust you're building in your nervous system doing that movement that you once couldn't do pain-free, now pain-free. I used to have excruciating flare-ups, Jefferson curling 15 pounds. I can Zercher Jefferson curl upwards of 225 nowadays. Just imagine the feedback loop that's going on in my nervous system there. Now my current narrative of my lower back and my spine, which is very important by the way, is wow, my lower back is strong as shit, frankly. That is very important. The fact that my nervous system and my spinal tissue can actually handle Jefferson curling that amount of weight in that range where I was once very crippled and very weak, which is also why now I can go and wrestle and train jiu-jitsu pain-free. I have no issues rounding anymore because I built it up to that weight. And when it comes to your weaknesses, this is a very important point that I want to address. You get the highest return on investment of addressing your weak points. If you already have a really strong core, but you can't round your back for shit, I want to ask you a question. What do you think is going to give you more progress? More core work or exposing yourself to flexion even if it's at a really weak stage? The correct answer is obviously exposing yourself to more flexion. We are only as strong as our weakest link. It is the same thing with lower back pain. We want to make sure that we are strong in every single area. As I always say, throw the kitchen sink at it. Make sure that in every single range possible that your spine can move, that you are strong in that area. Jefferson curl, A tier, enough said. All right, second to last, QL extension. It's going in B tier. It is a great movement to expose yourself to lateral flexion. Lateral flexion is the sideways bending of the spine. And the role of the quadratus lumborum muscle, the QL, is to perform that movement. Lateral flexion, side bending. The reason it's at B tier is that I think that there are better exercises incorporating lateral flexion. I'm a much bigger proponent of doing dumbbell side bends with your hand on your head right here, and then eventually working up to Smith machine or even just regular barbell side bends. Obviously, those are very advanced. The QL extension is the first step in actually building up towards that, and it does its job very, very well. It's also very scalable too. You can do an isometric hold at first if side bending hurts your spine. Actively just holding the QL at that stabilized position, doing an isometric off the side of the back extension, will build enough tolerance for you to eventually be able to move your QL through the range that lateral flexion demands. But as far as it being a lateral flexion movement, there's nothing super special about it. It's just one of the exercises in the list of progressions. Hopefully that makes sense. Still a great movement though. That's why it's in B tier. Now, finally, my favorite movement of all time, the reverse hyper. The guy who invented it, Louis Simmons, owner of Westside Barbell, may he rest in peace, literally fractured 2 vertebrae in his back doing a standing good morning. Doctors told him he needed a spinal fusion that he'd probably never lift again. This guy was such a freaking innovator, God bless him. He tried doing back extensions. They would flare him up like crazy, couldn't do them. He thought to himself, what if I just reversed the motion? Instead of folding the torso down and hinging from the hips that way, what if I kept the torso stationary instead used hip extension, the legs, to pump up and drive blood flow into the lower back? He fully rehabbed his back with it, went on to set more world records as a powerlifter. Now, why is the reverse hyper so good? Again, hopefully you were paying attention earlier. Imbibition is the sponge-like process of the spinal discs and the vertebrae where you compress them and decompress them over time, expelling waste, drawing in nutrients. The reverse hyper excels at this process like nothing else. Because of the pendulum, when you relax your legs at the bottom and allow the weight to carry them forward, you are actively tractioning and decompressing your back. When you swing them back up, the discs are squeezing back together. That is repeated imbibition. If you do like 4 sets of 20 on this, that is 80 reps of spinal imbibition. That is 80 reps of you expelling waste, drawing in nutrients, actively repairing your discs. The discs are avascular. They don't have a blood supply. They do not heal like normal soft tissue does. You need to do things that involve imbibition. That's why decompression is only in C tier. It's missing the other half of it, right? When it comes to a reverse hyper, that is decompression, compression, decompression, compression. If you have a disc bulge or a herniated disc and it is structurally still unresolved, if you are at the point where you can do reverse hypers pain-free, they are amazing. They are like no other rehab movement. Now, some guys will say, oh, well, the momentum and the swing motion of it tends to flare people up, which is true. I wouldn't program reverse hypers off the rip. I would program them for months 2 and 3 when you already have an established foundation when it comes to moving your spine under load. Because yes, they can flare people up. When you get to the point where you're able to do them pain-free, you are freaking set. The reverse hyper will get you back to 100%. This is the ultimate movement to bridge the gap back from a herniated disc to lifting weights pain-free. It excels at repairing the discs. It's also just a really, really great developer for the spinal erector muscles and the posterior chain in general. But the main point is that it just does something that no other exercise, lift, or movement could ever hope to replicate because of the pendulum system. It is one of a kind. I used it myself in the final months of my rehab to get myself from still feeling pain doing certain lifts to deadlifting heavy weights and waking up feeling like nothing happened. The reverse hyper belongs in S tier for all those reasons. And that is pretty much it. Hopefully you guys got a lot of info and value out of this one. And as always, I'll see you next time.